Hey everyone, this is editing Leslie just to introduce you to part two. Um, you've already seen part one. It was too long, and StreamYard will only allow me, it won't allow like 3 hours. So I had to break this up into two parts. Sorry about that. Um, Hopefully I made some sort of coherent sense. Thank you for being here. If you like this, I think I'm going to do this for every single book I read in the Chronicles. And I'm still going to do what I planned on, which is to have a talk about the adaptations, but like per character. But this is just kind of like an absolute rambling of my thoughts on this book, and I'll be doing this with each book. All right, let me get myself out of here so we can get this going. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the chat. For Lestat, he's like, well, she's our daughter. You're not going to go now, are you? And so, Louis now feels like, okay, he basically like baby trapped me. And also, like, Louis makes an assumption that in some ways, Lestat himself wanted to know his own reason for killing, wanted to examine his own life. He lived with me in a way he could never have lived alone. It was fear of him that made me tight with him. And then this is where, like, the interviewer actually asks the question because he's trying to figure out if Lestat is alive or not. And Louis just says, like, I don't even know. But also what we're hearing from him is that he sensed that even Lestat was unsure of some answers that Louis wants, that he was grappling with his existence as well. And I find that fascinating because I really wonder if Lestat really did feel that way or if that was like a projection of Louis as a character. And so then on the we get introduced to Claudia, and so Louis says, she was simply unlike Lestat and me to such an extent I couldn't comprehend her. For a little child she was, but also a fierce killer, now capable of the ruthless pursuit of blood with all a child's demanding. Claudia and Lestat might hunt and seduce, stay long in the company of the doomed victims, enjoying the splendid humor in his unwitting friendship with death. And so they just made a vicious monster. A vicious monster that would never remember their human life. And so, yeah, it's oh, I like that in the show. I felt like they were both culpable. They were more culpable in creating Claudia. And I thought that was really important to Louis' character, that they both participated in her making. They both participated in her making in the book, but on the show, it was actually Louis that wanted Claudia changed, and that was a change that like made more sense to me. One, because of how lonely Louis is and that he lost his family, but also it's important to Louis' story arc overall that that this was his decision and something that he put on Lestat, and that also tied them into their relationship, for the both of them, right? Because in the show, I felt like the show did something for Louis that really didn't happen for Louis. It definitely didn't happen for Louis in this book, and that was taking responsibility for his part in the making of Claudia. And what the show did with doing that, it really drove home the point that Louis spends a lot of time hating Lestat, but also not wanting to take responsibility for his part of like the messiness of the relationship. And so in the book, by the end of it, he still doesn't really take responsibility. um, for his part. Like there's a lot of guilt there, but if he had just taken responsibility in some ways, I think he would have found a capacity to forgive himself, um, and then in that way be able to forgive others. But he never gets there, and so that was actually a long, long way in the making for Louis to even get there in the books. And so on the show, they really try to close that arc in a way so that Louis could then accept their vampiric self for like the next stage of their existence. And I love the way the show did it. And I'm so excited for what's going to happen moving forward. Um, yeah, they're just basically talking about the viciousness of Claudia. Um, oh, and this is I want to I can't if anybody's watching here. Thank you. But also something that was in this book that stuck out to me more, and I don't know why it went over my head before, is that Claudia and Louis, they're constantly referring to each other as each other's lovers, and it's so disturbing. I know this is a gothic tale, so it's meant to be disturbing, but I want to know what you think, what the meaning of that was. Something that I was trying to think about was there's a couple of things. The creation of Claudia is an absolute nightmare. Um, it's something that shouldn't be done. Also, a couple of things. There's that. There's the fact that vampires don't engage in intercourse. They just their erotic experience come from drinking blood. Um, the other thing is they have created a nightmare situation that the only person that could ever love Claudia the way that she would want to be would be the person that made her, because they understand who she is and they're the ones that put her in that predicament. But um so I hope I make sense when I'm saying that, uh because gothic literature is still like it's a mix of erotic and horror, so I feel like that's what that element is going on in here. But yeah, they created a nightmare scenario with Claudia, and I also wonder if this speaks to um, the monstrousness of them. Because if and I'm going to say this, and this is like far fetching, because they're monsters, and it's almost like they just don't experience time like us. Is it like they don't see age as an issue because I don't know where I'm going with this. Do they not see an issue with age because they don't value humanity? And so if you don't value humanity and you're so detached from humanity, then you're just going to do even more monstrous things. That's what I was trying to get at with that, but I don't know. Also in the book, um, also they all Louis and Lestat give Claudia dolls all the time, and she at some point she really begins to like resent this. Let me see. And also something that we saw on the show, but I felt like because we're seeing it, we just like felt it more palpable, was like the violence between Louis and Lestat and what they press upon Claudia. But then I read this again and it's clearly there in the book. It's so wild what I blocked out, because on page 104, um, Louis says, I ignore the signs in her. But these were the signs. She grew cold to Lestat. She fell to staring at him for hours, and our fragile domestic tranquility erupted with his outrage. He did not have to be loved, but he would not be ignored. And once he even flew at her, shouting that he would slap her. And I found myself in the wretched position of fighting him as I'd done years before she'd come to us. And she was stalking him. She would follow Lestat and he'd get upset. Lestat would get upset at Louis, like as if he gave birth to her, and was like, "You got to know what's wrong with her." And so then Claudia really is like becomes antagonistic and says this, and I think this is why it was important that for Anne Rice when she wrote the time period that she went with, um, and the fact that Louis was a plantation owner, because Claudia says, then are you master of all of us? You didn't teach her that. Was she supposed to imbibe it from my quiet subservience? Oh, okay. That was Louis saying that to Lestat, actually. But that's something that even Claudia brings up at some point. She says, like, basically, like, you're treating us like we are slaves, basically. But she becomes cold. She becomes even more calculated. She wants to know why and how, like, what are the, like, I don't know, what's the science of it all, of like how vampires are created, and she's really trying to get at the root of their existence. Um, and she even says like they're locked together in hatred because she's so dependent on them. And so Louis goes on to say, like, something that stuck with me, because birds are used throughout the story, and Louis says, I remember holding her and burying my head in her small chest, crushing her bird shoulders. And so it's like she's angry at both of them, but um, she kind of says I feel like she's very much like manipulating Louis. I think that's what's going on, but he doesn't see it, but us as a reader kind of do, because she she has to use what she has, and so she manipulates her childlike charms on Louis. And so I think ultimately that's what I get at, from her plan in the future, is that she has to hate someone, so she hates Lestat because she also needs to survive. And so Claudia goes on to say, um, to Louis, she says, the vampire made a slave of him, and he would no more be a slave than I would be a slave. And so he killed him before he knew what he might know, and then in panic made a slave of you, and you've been his slave, basically. And Claudia says, and I'm going to free them both, or I'm going to free us both. And she even says something to the effect of, I have a secret I'm going to tell you. And she says, I want to kill him and I will enjoy it. But on the show, she says, I'm going to tell you a secret. You also want to kill him and you're going to enjoy it. And I felt like that was just so much more riveting, because either way, the show has to define and indicate that this is something that Louis also wanted, because then he just comes off way too passive. And that's something that goes on in here, is that Claudia, in the book, Claudia is the one that cuts Lestat's throat. And she puts together the plan, she executes the plan, and Louis is just like passive the whole time, but also gets upset with Claudia once it's done. And so that's another moment where we see like a pattern with Louis, which is Lestat told Louis, I'm going to make her a vampire. I want us to have a child. And then Louis gets upset after. And then Claudia here tells Louis the plan and what they're going to do, and then he gets mad after. So that's an indication, a couple of stats. We're seeing how Claudia is like Lestat, but we're also seeing a pattern with Louis, like where he's so passive, but then once the thing is done, he wants to blame the other person for what is done. And so, yeah, it's just Something else that happens is that I swear to you, I looked everywhere. I could not find a name. So I don't know if the character gets named later in a maybe in a different book because I don't remember. Um, but wow, all this scheming is going on between with Claudia and what she's gonna do to Lestat. Lestat does start like spending time with somebody else, a guy, but in the show they change the character to Antoinette, like a female. I think they also just want to show how uh, Lestat will be with any gender. He doesn't like really discriminate in that way, so I think that's why the character was gender swapped in the show, just to kind of like show who the character is moving forward. Um, but like in here I couldn't find a name of the character, but there's just someone that was also had like a musical talent on in the show. The character's name Antoinette, and they could sing, so they had a musical talent, which definitely interests Lestat. That's like his weak spot. And jumping around in the book, um Louis says, "What does it mean to die when you can live until the end of the world? And what is the end of the world except a phrase? I have lived for 2 centuries." And then he goes on to say, "Illuminated by a light which was not a light, like the light by which God made the world before he made light." And so it's like talking about the genesis of existence. And I thought that was really cool. But that's also part of one of the titles of the episodes. That was really good. And something that really stood out to me before I move forward is the vision that Louis has. Reading that as a young kid, and at the time I was like really questioning like my like, what is it that I believe. Reading this book really tapped into like um, my confusion, because Louis has like a vision, and through that vision he feels like he's the only supernatural entity within a church, right? He goes on, he goes, "God did not live in this church. These statues gave an image of nothingness. I was a supernatural in this cathedral. I was the only supermoral thing that stood conscious under this roof. Loneliness, loneliness to the point of madness." And so he has this vision, and for him, that was him defining like what he felt, but then also going into church and feeling like there's no God. Um, and that's the depth of loneliness, right? For him to uh, be this like super moral being, but if there's the only thing that exists, if there's no God, then that's like incredible loneliness, right? It's like almost saying like, but then am I the God? Where does morality lie? And so that's something that really stood out for me when that I read when I was younger, and it was that specific vision that had me so like enraptured, that I would read it over and over again. And then once again, he does bring up his brother, so we see like throughout the book how much um, Paul's death left an impression on him. And then, oh, something that I marked, this is just for my recollection more than anything else, is that like the idea of going to Europe. Um and so Louis was saying, "I was Creole who wanted to see where it had all begun." And so I like that they bring up his lineages, his heritage, his cultural upbringing as Creole, because I have like no memory of like these little details. And the character is Creole in the show, and I think that they really like uh, bring that into the conversation of 1919 and what the character is up against, to also pose like this is someone that is he's of the land, he's of so much deep history in his family, but still gets treated like an outsider. It just kind of brings it back to that. And so I loved how much attention to detail the show had. Um, But yeah, so we learned that Lestat had basically like a friend, and it ended up being this like backup vampire. Um, and also when Claudia is at the point where she's attempting to unalive Lestat, suddenly Louis doesn't remember everything too well. He goes, I cannot tell you all that happened then. I cannot possibly recount it as it was. I remember heaving the lamp at Lestat. It smashed at his feet and the flames rose at once from the carpet. So this is after Claudia has already attempted to unalive him, and like a supervillain, Lestat rises from the dead. And then Louis throws the lamp at him because he's really just trying to like put him out. So once again, we also see how Louis sees using fire as a solution because he's already by now burnt down Point du Lac, and now their second home with Claudia is now burnt. And we also see that Claudia takes the life of the other new vampire that was Lestat's new partner, the same way Antoinette was taken out, which I thought was great. So that was the end of part one. And now we're on to part two, which was Eastern Europe. I'm going to leave this like a short conversation. What I liked about this was how much of it still seems close to the show. They have the revenants, which are the vampires. Morgan and here, like this, the changes are so slight, but they serve the story. Morgan here is a painter. He's an artist, and he's just was looking forward to meeting someone that also speaks English while they're in Eastern Europe. But in the version in the books, Louis gets involved in trying to figure out what's taking out all these people. But it's more like an active choice to help the villagers out. In the show, it's not like that at all. The revenants serve like a different function. And so in the book, Louis decides to play hero and kill the revenants. And so like at nighttime there's like a curfew, but when Louis goes out to try to help out, no one knows that he's like a vampire. And I guess Morgan tries to kind of sneak out. I'm assuming he was looking for Louis and Claudia. And so we find him already hurt, like already potentially like been bitten by a vampire or whatever. Claudia decides to just kind of slurp him like a straw a little bit, but kind of leaves him alive for Louis. But Louis turns away and decides he doesn't want to like participate in ending this person's life because I think he felt like a little bit of a connection with him. And so in the show, it's different. In the show, he does have a little bit of a connection with Morgan, but Morgan is a photographer, and for the purposes of the show, it's important that Morgan's a photojournalist because this is where Louis gets interested. Like Morgan picked his interest. So by the time he gets to Paris, he himself starts to pick up photography as an art form. And he just wants to be like, like in the throes of the artistic community. And so that's also important because when we think of photos, we think of like memories. And a through line throughout like the first two seasons is just like how memory is a monster. And in this book, we read how at times Louis feels like an unreliable narrator, especially when it comes to something that he may be responsible for. He suddenly doesn't remember the details quite so well, and really puts like the actions of others on them, even though at any point in time he could have like spoken up, but suddenly he's passive and upset about those actions. And so yeah, swinging back to that, that was how like Morgan was changed a little bit. What happens with the revenants is different. I'm trying to remember. I think they do kill a revenant, but it's not necessarily to help out the villagers. It's out of like preservation for themselves, for Claudia and Louis, because a revenant does try to like take them out. But also on the show, it's there is like this one revenant woman they come across, which is nice to see because they're the female vampires in Anne Rice's work are few and far between. Um, but early on in the book, like Lestat says, like these vampires are going to spot you before you spot them. Let me see. Actually, something that's not in the book is I don't think we fully get the sense of what happened Lestat and his making, if I remember correctly. I just read this and I'm already forgetting. But in the show, we do get an answer about how Lestat was made. And so at that time, Claudia doesn't really believe him. She also doesn't really believe him in the book. And so what happens on the show is they're actually driving Lestat's point. Claudia actually experiences what Lestat went through. There was like, she's this vampire, she doesn't have the answers, and then someone throws themselves into the fire. And so I think there's little crumbs of Claudia getting glimpses of what Lestat was saying, but she's also prideful, like Lestat, and doesn't even want to see in some ways. Like she's seeing it, but she's kind of like, she doesn't want to say Lestat was right, right? And so I like those changes from the book. And also in the show, like it's not a clear like hero thing that Louis and Claudia go out and try to help the villagers, because they're also trying to show the arc of Louis becoming more and more detached from humanity and learning his lesson to not involve himself with human affairs. Like in the show, it was Babette, right? So that all like stuck out to me for their Eastern Europe vacation. I'm trying to skip that part. So then we end up in part 3 because they already went through everything they went. And at that time, Louis is like, we need our language, we need our people, we need to go directly to Paris, because the conversation is for Louis that he's Creole and he just wants to get to maybe those parts of his roots. And something that's really beautiful that really hit me hard in the show, and I'm going to read it here. In the book, Louis says something to Daniel, and it's about how New Orleans is a little like, the book Louis says that New Orleans is basically like in the shadow of Paris, right? We know like the history of that connection, right? So Louis goes on to say, this is kind of long. I'm trying to skip some of this and go, but New Orleans, though beautiful and desperately alive, was desperately fragile. There was something forever savage and primitive there, something that threatened the exotic and sophisticated life both from within and without. Not an inch of those wooden streets, nor a brick of the crowded Spanish houses had not been bought from the fierce wilderness that forever surrounded the city, ready to engulf it. Hurricanes, floods, fevers, and plague, and the damp of the Louisiana climate itself worked tirelessly on every hewn plank or stone facade, so that New Orleans seemed at all times like a dream in the imagination of her striving populace, a dream held intact at every second by a tenacious, though unconscious, collective will. And so what the show did was grabbed that, kind of boiled it down beautifully. And although this is Louis talking to Daniel and like comparing Paris and New Orleans, the show took this dialogue and actually gave it to Lestat, and it was used not in that way. It was used to contextualize their relationship, and it's more of like this deep love confession from Lestat to Louis about how much Lestat loves Louis and all his fragility in uh, all his tumultuous ways, and it's a deeply moving scene, and I loved it. I love that this was grabbed and then like recontextualized to drive home a point of the love of these characters, and that could only be pulled off with this like incredible writing and knowing what needed to be the point that needed to be driven home, which is they didn't just look at this book, they looked at the entire series and had to define both characters and their relationship and what they meant to each other. And so this just seemed like such a grand gesture to me. And so when I reflect on the series, anytime, like even in the narration, when they first start courting each other, because there's more of a courting that goes on in the show, which I really liked. Um, Louis says something like, they spent time in the park, and he tells Daniel, the interviewer, well, Lestat fell in love with New Orleans. And that may be true, but really that symbolizes Lestat fell in love with Louis. So anytime we hear about like Lestat's love for Louis or his connection uh, to New Orleans, it's really about his love for Louis. And I love that. I will always revere that scene and how they grabbed this text to make that work. So yeah, so there's also this like erotic way that Anne Rice writes, and there's a scene that it kind of reminds me of that movie Call Me by Your Name, because if you see that film, there's a sense of like, a character will touch something and you could just tell that there's like this oozing desire. And I felt like that's what she's capturing in her writing, because she goes on to write, because the air was sweet like the air of our courtyard in the Rue Royale, and all was alive with a shocking profusion of gaslight that rendered even the ornate, lofty ceiling devoid of shadows. And yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. But yeah, they go on to talk about their love of Paris. And this is another change from the book, but we are going to run into Madeline, and Madeline in the books is a doll maker, and Claudia in the books is a toddler. She's like 4 years old or something like this. And so Lestat and Louis, I think they would always get Claudia dolls, and she just grew so I don't know, like disdainful of having dolls. But there is a doll maker, and the doll maker, she asks her not to make her uh, a baby doll, but like a lady doll. And so it says here, lady doll. And so on the show, what I thought was such a great decision was they changed the doll maker to a dressmaker. So this is someone that is a seamstress, owns their own business. And I thought that was so important because Claudia in the books making the baby dolls, having a lady doll was just like her trying to get at what she wants for herself that she'll never be able to have. And on the show, we have a dressmaker that can literally make a dress for Claudia so that she feels like she's starting to see herself reflected in the mirror. And also, I've talked about this before, but like Madeline of the books doesn't really truly see Claudia for who she is. Ultimately, she's okay. So, um, Madeline in the books had a daughter that died really young, and so she sees Claudia as this like eternal child, a daughter that like will never die. So this sounds like a great deal for her. She's like, great, make me a vamp. I'd love to be a mother forever. I'd love to have a child that will never die, because she's so grief stricken from that and like a little bit mad in a way. But in doing that, that means that she really doesn't see Claudia for who she is. And unfortunately, she's just trying to replace someone. And that also kind of makes Claudia second fiddle to a memory of someone, right? Which is kind of how she probably feels with like between Louis and Lestat. And so I love the creation of Madeline in the show, um, because this is someone that has vision, can create a design and make Claudia feel like how she feels inside, but someone that also sees Claudia for who she really is. And then, of course, yes, there's the aging up of Claudia, which I was very thankful for because it lends to um, an actor that's an adult playing a younger character having a chance to say adult lines, because I don't want a kid saying these these things. Um, which leads me to the conversation about Claudia again, because Claudia broaches a conversation that like Louis seems to feel really uncomfortable about, but it's because Claudia's in a toddler's body and she has to ask about things that she's never going to experience. And so she asks Louis, what was it like making love? And he basically just like starts to walk away because it's uncomfortable for him. And he's like, all right, I'll be candid. And he goes, it was something hurried, how earnest, and it was seldom savored, something acute that was quickly lost. I think that it was the pale shadow of killing. So I also wonder if this is an indication that maybe to read in between the lines and consider like maybe what the writers were looking for is these are this is an indication that Louis had been with someone intimately like as a human, but I wonder if they were just maybe the opposite sex, and that's why he did not savor those encounters, because once he becomes a vampire, um he is with Lestat, right? There is part of himself that's opening up himself to who he really is. And so that just kind of struck me when I was reading that. But yeah, an uncomfortable conversation for him for something that he no longer does, because there's no desire to do that, right? Um, and so yes, so then eventually, um, also something in here is that there's more of an indication that they both want to know what's out there, and so he oh Louis comes across Santiago, which is the first vampire in Paris that he comes across, and so he does that thing, that like mimicry thing that he does, and instantly they get off on the bad foot, and like Louis calls him a buffoon, and then I really like how eventually he does he gets out of the way, and like Armand shows up and gives him a card, and on the card he wrote like bring the petite beauty with you, was really just an indication that they had already been like stalking him, right? um and we're well aware that they existed, and so I'm trying to remember, and so they just constantly don't have a good relationship with the Paris coven, but Armand seems to gravitate towards them, and especially Louis. Also, okay, so what was so disturbing in here was that was changed for the show, um, and I think it worked well for the narrative that they're weaving. Is on the stage, it's just a performance where these vampires are pretending to be humans, pretending to be vampires on stage in order to take their victims. And there's a victim, and when Louis and Claudia go to the show for the first time, this human refuses to um, choose someone else to take her place. She's just like, I can't do it. And they kind of get like frustrated and kind of like go on with the show and unalive this person anyways. But on the television show, the adaptation, the woman does decide to choose somebody else. And I felt like what the show was tapping into is like what Anne Rice's is what do you call it? Not creating similarities to, which is that just the monstrousness of vampirism, but also the monstrous acts of humanity. One of those monstrous acts that are just woven in is just the fact that Louis is a plantation owner, right? And so on the show, they have this woman say, "Take this person out that's in the second row, whatever. Just take them. Don't take my life." And I think that's another indication that the viciousness of humanity and how someone will be for themselves, for like self preservation, even if we think like the act is immoral, and also like pushes kind of like what Louis feels about being damned because he's a vampire. Because then we could also look at humanity and kind of be like, well, humanity's done some terrible things as well. So it's just like, how can you say you're more damned than anyone else, or choose what is going to damn you, right? Um, and so we do meet Armand, and it says that he's. I'm bringing this up very specifically because uh, Armand comes into play. Louis is, there's like this fear set in with him. Um, and also, we see that Armand has this capability to manipulate reality that I did not catch before. Why? I don't know. But it really stood out to me this time that he had a level of delirium, that him and Claudia were being controlled by him. They're being telepathically conversated to this way. He was, yeah, definitely manipulating reality. He's a very scary person to be around. But something else that I marked, I don't know which one it was, but also that the coven dyes their hair black. Like they wear black and they dye their hair black. Uh, and I'm gonna remember that for towards the end because I'm gonna forget. I wrote it down. And also, I have another question about like something that's disturbing that I kind of brought up earlier. I have no recollection. I know the disturbing dynamic between like Louis and Claudia, but Armand has like a boy. I don't know how young he is, but clearly says that it's a boy that he's keeping like a human slave, and that he sucks on like a straw. But there's this when Louis, samples his also drinks on him like a cup, like a smoothie. There's this very blatant erotic connection, um, too erotic for my taste, between the boy and Louis, and I just felt confused about like what Anne Rice was trying to say with that. And I mean, we're talking about all these different gradations of evil. So maybe that's what she's getting at. I just didn't understand why the human boy. Um, but yeah, that was definitely something to consider. So there's this whole like dialogue about mm, good and evil and God, which really like I love these conversations, and how Louis feels like, or at least with Stat, he wasn't communicating and felt like he couldn't have these like intellectual conversations. But as scary as Armand is, he can't have these conversations with Armand. I feel like it's that back and forth banter with them that really like attracts each other. Um, but it's like this mingling of being like scary. But and then also, even though that's going on, there's this moment where like Armand is kissing all his members of his coven, and like Louis gets like jealous of that, and I find that very interesting because he's just the way that he exhibits not liking someone, being scared of someone, but also being jealous when other people is around them is like absolutely wild. Um, they also like figure out, and this is something that they did. I think that they did this really well. Um, oh, I wish I could. Where was it? Oh, I think Santiago notices that he has like this French accent again, which is something they also brought forward in the television show, but more like noticing that he has like a New Orleans accent. Um, where is it? Oh, there's something else. Um, Louis does leave like the interaction with the coven, and he's thinking about how he wronged Lestat, but in his head it's like something you think, but he let out the whisper of it, and then Santiago hears it. And so even though that happened, um, in the show, it wasn't a whisper. It's more like the vampires are sussing out the information from like trying to figure it out. But what I like here is this also this description was used in the show as to point out Louis' unreliable narration, because like in the second episode when Louis is first turned into a vampire, Lestat says that like Maker and Fledgling cannot communicate to each other. Like that line of communication is cut off once you become a vampire. But we see that Lestat talks to Louis telepathically. And so later on, way at the end of the show, Louis says, "Oh, actually, I think I just whispered it. I think that's what it was, and I just messed up when I told you." So that it plays into several things. One, that like his unreliable narrator because he just remembered something wrong. But two, they grabbed that from the book from that and then applied it that way. And I thought that was like they're just so wildly talented, these writers. Um, I'm trying to skip over some things. We also learned that Santiago is younger than them, which is also something the show like focused on. Celeste is like jealous of Claudia's beauty, which is weird because she's a child. um, but also we see like the dynamics between Armand and Louis. Time and time again, it seems like uh, they're like attracted to each other, but Lestat is also like in his passivity, he's like rebuffing Armand because Armand clearly wants him, but then Louis will go on and just spend his time with Claudia and doesn't want to really acknowledge whatever is going on between him and Armand. And so, at some point, like, um, Armand does say, like, I want you more than anything in the world. He actually like confesses that. And they do like have this like a little bit of a love confession, but then Louis goes back to ignoring him again. Um, and I just thought that just stood out more, and they really tapped into that on the show. And to show that, intermingled with that was like Louis actually seeing Armand as a teacher, like someone he could learn from. But because what Anne Rice indicated really early on is just because you're a vampire doesn't mean you can just tap into your powers. Like you have to be taught. This is something that you actually have to uh, exercise that in a way to try to make happen. And he just didn't know. He didn't know how. And he didn't have a teacher that was willing to show him or teach him. Um, you skip this. There's like someone draws a painting of Louis and then he gets like upset because I think he feels like he really sees himself in that. And I felt like that was something else that they used in the show, but for Armand, because there is a whole other conversation about art when it comes to Armand, but they do use like the idea that Armand doesn't feel seen because no one's painted him in so many years. And I felt like, gosh, that's such an indication of what happens here in the book, but but in the book, it happens to Louis. Um, but yeah, what really stood out to me this time is that we get an idea so much more of like how Claudia is manipulating Louis, and that's because she senses that Louis is gonna leave her, but she's a toddler. She's so dependent, so she does talk Louis into making Madeline a vampire. But she does like confess, like, I hate you and I love you in equal measure. And so she's really confessing her hatred for Louis. And I think we just have to go back and remember that I feel like this is like a confession from Claudia and really showing her how manipulative she is, because she'll say that, but then she'll kind of like once again use her childlike charisma to then like shower Louis with love because she needs something from him. It really is manipulation on her part, but they made a child vampire, so that's all she has. And so I just find that wildly interesting, like how dangerous and vicious she is. And I also feel like um really shows like what she's really after. Like how much does she really love Louis, or is she just doing like treat him that way because she doesn't have a choice because she's so dependent. She has to present herself that way or like continue this dynamic in this way because she really doesn't have another choice. And also, Louis is so passive. Maybe she just thought he was easier to manipulate between Louis and Lestat. And also, I'm going to read a little bit of something. Throughout the book, Louis is constantly reflecting on Lestat. And so Louis says, I had left Lestat and never looked back for him, as if I had moved on away from him, beyond the need of him and anyone else, as if the night had said to me, you are the night, and the night alone understands you and enfolds you in its arms. That is so like important because that was used in the show in two ways. One is when they're in Eastern Europe and they come across a revenant and they meet this like female revenant and communicate with them as best as they can. And that female revenant says, in terms of the night, she says, we own nothing. And that's when the revenant decides to throw themselves into the fire. And by the end of the show, Louis flips that. He's now accepting his vampire nature and really choosing life and says, I own the night. And so I felt like this moment, I felt like the writers got that, that this was like what those moments were born from this and creating, solidifying the arc of Louis, right? Someone that throughout the books is, has, unaliving ideation to someone that chooses life. So he has to want to be one with the night, want to own the night, and I just to command the night, you know. And I thought that was really cool. Um, so yeah, I'm trying to skip everything about Madeline because I already talked about it and kind of went off. Oh, also they let me let's bring this up again. Madeline is a little bit mad and she burns her doll shop because she kind of like just wants to she's had this rebirth. So the doll shop gets burned down and I thought that's so like interesting. So I'm like, so now is that the third thing? That's like the third fire that Louis has been involved in. Yeah, is a doll shop. So one was Du Point du Lac property, then the second home with Lestat when they're trying to get rid of Lestat, and now the doll shop is burned down. So those are like the three, and there's gonna be another one. And I just thought that was so like wild that the answer is constantly just burn things down. um, and so even when even when Louis makes Madeline and Claudia, he still doesn't like leave right away to be with Armand or indicate to Armand that that's what he wants to do. Like we know in the narrative that that's what he wants to do. He made Madeline for Claudia so that he could be with Armand, but he still doesn't do it. He doesn't like he just stays with Madeline and Claudia. And also oh, I forget. He said something that I felt like gave Armand the idea. Unbeknownst to Louis, I don't think he really realized it, and they carried it on to the show. But said something like, I think he did have a conversation with Armand and said like, "Oh, but if Claudia has Madeline, then I'm free to be with you," basically. And so I think when he said that to Armand, it gave Armand an idea of what happens later on, and that like I think Louis doesn't even realize it. And in the show, that happens again, but more like direct, more like meaner, because Armand, I mean, he's trying to persuade Armand of something on the show, right? And so he says, "Well, could you picture my life without her, without the burden of her?" And I felt like that also gave Armand the idea for what he plans for Claudia in the show. Um, but yeah, and he also something that like Louis reflects on and looks differently on is Lestat. We start to get like glimpses of it because he's still thinking about his brother, and he's with Claudia and Madeline. So he's thinking about his brother and he's also thinking about Lestat. And he says, "I allowed myself to forget how totally I had fallen in love with Lestat's iridescent eyes, that I'd sold my soul for a many-colored and luminescent thing, thinking that a highly reflective surface conveyed the power to walk on water. What would Christ need have done to make me follow him, like Matthew and Peter, dress well to begin with, and have a luxurious head of pampered hair?" And I think also he realizes like that Claudia, when she says she has equal measure of love and hate for him, is just an indication that she really doesn't feel anything for him. And I think that's just like it's just tough for him. Sorry, my eyes, I'm tired. Um, but also we are 274 pages into the book, and Louis is barely admitting he has any love for Lestat because this whole time, all he does is speak of his hatred for him. And I just feel like that's such a, you know what that reminded me of? Okay, hold on. You know what? Let me hold off on that. Sorry, my eyes are like getting upset. Sorry, they come across Armand again. Oh, this is where he gives them the idea. I wrote it down. I was trying to look for it. Um, okay, so Louis talking to Armand. Says, "No, she's no paramour of mine. You don't understand." So he goes on to say, "I've gone over and over in my mind. I don't know if the child possesses the power to release the parent. I don't know that I won't be bound to her for as long as she dot dot dot." And then he stops himself because what he's really trying to get is as long as she lives. And I think that's the moment where he messes up and doesn't realize that he gave Armand the idea that he would never release himself from Claudia unless she was dead. And also, I think that's also why he's putting off going with Armand. And so that really gives him, because, you know, Armand is this calculated person, with, and, you know, knows what they want, concise. And so I really think that was what sealed Claudia's fate in the long run. Oh, there's a whole conversation about love. Her words for the stat. Trying to remember who he's talking to. I think they're talking about the ruthlessness of love and how he disappointed Paul. So here we are, like 2/3 of the way into the book, and he's still thinking of Paul. Like that, just really, we really see like how much that affected his life. Um, oh, also something that I didn't realize, and they changed it for the show, and I don't know if it's gonna change in the next season if we're gonna get another layer of this. But when Louis makes Madeline a vampire, he thinks he does it of his own free will, but it turns out Armand was exerting his power to make sure Louis did it. So Louis may have not done it if it wasn't for Armand. So Armand wasn't going to do it directly. He was going to do it himself, but he did make sure that Louis did it because ultimately Armand is a manipulator and he wants Louis. So that really stood out to me because I had no recollection of that at all. Let me skip all that. But even then, like I'm on page 288, and even though like Louis is like he's already made Madeline, and Armand is trying to say like, okay, you're gonna go with me. He says, no, I said gently, it's too soon. I can't leave them yet. So he's still putting it off. And I think Armand hears that he wants Louis, and so he's gonna do whatever he's gonna have to do to get him. Um, so then I get captured, and he sees Lestat, and so Lestat is impeccably dressed. He was, as always, rich black cloak and fine linen. And it's so funny because it's like he also in the show wore like this uh like black, I think black suit, like black and white shirt, if I remember correctly. And he was remarkably dressed. And I just think it's so interesting because this is through memory. So he may not have looked at like that at all, but that's a recollection. And that's also an indication of like Louis' love for Lestat. So he pleads to Louis for Louis to come with him and that he needs to tell him something. Um, and so Louis is pleading and he's like, get Armand. Armand is the leader of this coven. Like, get him to help us. And Lestat says we to Santiago, like, we had a deal. Let me just have Louis. And he says that he didn't know. Ultimately, he's kind of saying like he didn't know what they're gonna do with Claudia, right? And he like what happens to Claudia happens to Claudia, and Louis gets out of the coffin, which by the way did not happen the same way like it did in the show where they put all those rocks in there. Oh my god, that did not happen in the book. It's worse in the show. But when Armand gets Louis out of the coffin and he gets out, Lestat has Claudia's yellow dress and he's just crumbling and crying for what happened. So I wonder if we're going to see that next season, that we didn't see this season and season 2 in the show. I wonder if we're going to get like a little glimpse of, because we see that Santiago grabbed in the television show the yellow dress, but we don't see what happened to it. And then by the end of the series, we see the yellow dress um, is in present day. So I just wonder how they're going to handle that, if we're going to see Lestat crumble in a way that we didn't see him at the end of season 2, but I think that's because of unreliable narrator. But also there was like a parallel in the book that I didn't recognize. It's clear in the show, I just didn't recognize it in the book, and it felt very devastating on the show. And that is on the show, they changed Claudia to potentially being consumed by fire, and Louis grabbing her, saving her, making a vampire, only to years later to still die by the fire of the sun, right? And there's that just poetic parallel that of her fate was always going to be sealed that way. And in the books, Claudia, I guess, when she was initially found, I think in her home, um, I think Anne Rice is making the connection of she was in her home in the kitchen, like with her mother, dead, but Claudia was still alive. The plague was going on. But then by the end of the book, when um, Louis finds Madeline and Claudia dead, it reminds them. It reminds Louis back of when he first found her as a toddler, as a human, and it paralleled mother and daughter. So basically, she was always going to die in this same way, holding each other in the kitchen floor. It just like reminded him of that. And Louis even says the only person that witnessed um, Claudia in your human toddler state, the only one that's gonna realize this moment and how they parallel each other is just me and Lestat. No one else is gonna know that. No one else knows that. And so that was just a parallel, a mirroring of Claudia's conclusion and in a devastating way that only those two characters were ever really gonna know. And so we even hear he comes across Armand, and Armand says, "I could not prevent it. I could not prevent it." And he says it like another page later. He says, "I could not prevent it," um, which is rich considering he's a leader of a coven. And so Louis comes to a realization. He says that passivity in me has been the core of it all, the real evil, the weakness that refused to compromise, a fractured and stupid morality, that awful pride. So we also see him seeing like the flaw of his passivity, right? Which I thought was like really important for him to come to a conclusion to. And I really like, I love that. I love this show. I love this book. And also in his revenge, what does he do? He burns the theater to the ground. So that's a fourth fire, guys. Four fires in this book as a solution. And so what Armand doesn't realize when he's doing this calculated thing, because he thinks he's gonna keep Louis to himself now that Claudia's gone, it was like the wrong move for so many ways that should be obvious, but also Louis says that Claudia was gone beyond reprieve, and I had less reason to live than I'd ever had, and less desire. So he's always had a problem with unaliving like ideation, and this just like had it flare up again. And it was just like the wrong thing. Like, Armand, you're so wrong. You just did like the worst thing possible. Um, and we also get a glimpse of how calculated a decision was Armand, because Armand removed his human guards. So he very actively made sure that Louis could do what he wanted to do. So we get an indication that like what a manipulator Armand is, and that he gave Louis an opportunity to burn down the coven. People that he's like been like the leader over for so long, and he just so coldly let he was part of manipulation to bring a coven down, basically. And so to me, it seemed like he begrudgingly partnered with Armand, because I think he just felt like he had nothing left. He's barely staying alive. He's once again in like a zombie state. And I also feel like when he goes off and they travel around the world, I think more than anything that's an indication of like he what could Armand is not enough. Like they go to Egypt, they go to Greece, they go to Italy, they go to Asia Minor, um, and Armand could do all he wants, but ultimately Louis says, "I closed up like a spider in the flame of a match." So they are together, but like it's like Louis is not really there. He's not really opened up to Armand. He's guarded. He's despondent. They're companions, but like Louis is his passive self, and he's clearly not ending it. I think time and time again we get an indication of how much guilt Louis has, and I feel like he definitely feels like he's with Armand because I also think that's what he thinks he deserves after everything that happened. Um, and so he talks about having this. He has this like nagging feeling of wanting to go to New Orleans, and so then like Armand lets him know like that Lestat is in New Orleans, and so that's also all it takes. All it takes is that Armand just has to tell Armand tell him that he's in New Orleans and he's off. He's like, let me go see. And also, I'm trying to skip the part where they meet because also something else about their meeting that changed on the show that I liked is in the book, like uh, Lestat physically is not doing well. We know he's not doing well. On the show, they make it more of like emotional damage. In the book, they're kind of like, no, he's physically not doing well, as well as emotionally. And he also Lestat just says outright in the books like Claudia should have never been made, and it just feels so cruel and like not the thing to say. Like I get where what he's saying, but still it's like you haven't seen Louis in so long. This is something that has scarred you both for the rest of your life. Maybe don't say that Claudia should have never existed. So I like that changed on the show. He doesn't say that, but we do. There is this like mutual understanding that what happened with Claudia like forever changed them, and they both had that experience together, and um, it'll be something that they'll be paying for the rest of their life. There's no changing it. There's no repairing that damage, but it's something that bonds them, and so I think they just handle it better in the show. Because that moment together had to mean something else other than what it was in the book. For Louis, I think in the book it's like him getting he just needed to kind of see Lestat and like maybe get a little bit of a closure. And also he says, oh, I think I passed it, but it really like touched me. Um I'm so annoyed because I don't think it was like so poetic. Oh, okay. When Armand tells Louis that like Lestat is in New Orleans, like he's alive, he goes, Lestat, in fact, had aroused in me feelings which I hadn't wished to confide in anyone, feelings I'd wished to forget. Despite Claudia's death, hatred had not been one of them. And so here we go again where it's like Louis still can't say it. He really can't say that he loves Lestat, like, but it was such a beautiful way that that it's said here. He goes, hatred was not one of those feelings, and it's because it's his overwhelming love for Lestat, no matter all the ish that they've been through. And I was just like, it's so deeply touching. And even when Louis goes to see him, Lestat's fledgling says, "Oh, so you're Louis." So you know Lestat's been talking about Louis, probably just as much as Louis has been thinking of Lestat all these years. Um, that's they're kind of like, yeah, they're getting into it. And so then, Louis says something quite the opposite here. He goes, about their meeting and Lestat crying, and he goes, only it didn't seem to me to be a sadness for Lestat, for that smart gay vampire who used to live there. And I'm like, he just spent a whole book saying that he hated Lestat and that he was dumb, but in the end, he's like really inhabiting his feelings for Lestat and saying the opposite. Now he's like, he's making a very clear Lestat is smart and he's gay, and which is also saying like he was very much my companion, to read between the lines. And it says, I put my hand to my face and wiped at the tears that were in fact there and looked at them in amazement. So what's going on is, so much of like Louis has crawled in internally like a spider, like I said with Armand, but with Lestat, he starts to feel again. He's emotionally moved in a way that um, he hasn't been able to be moved, because it's like, and he goes, "How can you understand it all? How can you endure?" And so it's like, as a vampire, you have to learn how to endure, right? And so here we go again. Louis says like, he didn't think it was like a big deal, which I also think is like Louis brushing on the rug his experience with Lestat. And he goes back to Armand and he's like, "Oh, I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but I told Armand that I saw Lestat." And he goes, "But it meant a great deal to Armand. He was amazed that I hadn't mentioned this before." Um, and then I feel like, once again, Armand is able to get to something clear and concise that even Louis is being so passive about. And he goes, what was it? I, it's like, I think he just confesses about like his involvement with what happened to Claudia. But the thing is, Louis already knew. He's like, yeah, he's basically like, yeah, I know you had a problem. I know you. This is all you're doing. Uh, and so he even tells Armand, because he's waiting. I think Armand feared this whole time that Louis would figure it out. But Louis says to him, "Oh, that it was you who killed her." And he's like, and then he closed his eyes and turned his face away, his hand resting on his chest as if I struck him an awful sudden blow. And I'm like, come on, Armand. Come on. You feel guilty after all this time, but he wanted he wanted Louis. Um so yeah, it's just like, for him, I think Armand like acknowledging out loud what he did, and the fact that Louis already knows, I think just pains him too much. It's too much for him, and I think that's also why maybe they were together the whole time as they traverse the world, right? Louis feels like this is what he deserves. He has nothing left. He is a living dead. He is a vampire. He's barely holding on. Um, but also he is well aware that like Louis feeling emotion is also an indication of Louis's love for Lestat, even if at that time he wasn't able to like really acknowledge it. And so he's just like Armand's upset and he says, a long sigh escaped his lips. His head was bowed. His right hand lay limp beside him in the grass. Hatred, that is passion, he said. Revenge, that is passion. Not for me, I murmured softly. Not now. And then his eyes fixed on me, and his face seemed very calm. I used to believe you would get over it, that when the pain of all of it left you, you would grow warm again and filled with love, and filled with that wild and insatiable curiosity that which you first came to me, that inveterate, I can't even say that, inveterate conscience, and that hunger for knowledge that brought you all the way to Paris. She never loved you, not in the way that I loved you, and the way that you loved us both. Um, and even that part about um, she never loved you, that was used in like season 2, episode 5, very concisely. Um, but really to talk about how much Armand and Lestat love Louis and that Claudia never did. That maybe she was just manipulating him the whole time, right? And so what I love that Armand sees that like Louis at that time isn't willing to see is this whole time that he's saying, like, Lestat's dumb. I can't learn anything from him. I hate him. That actually reminded me of that movie, When Harry Met Sally. And because in that movie, we have two curmudgeon friends that eventually like accept that they've fallen in love to each other. And I can't even think of the name of the characters, but the female character at the end, when like oh my god, what's his name? Billy Crystal's character when he oh, hello. Harry Met Sally, of course, that's the name. So when Harry confesses his love and is like, "No, I love you," at the end, Sally replies, "You know what, Harry? I really hate you." But that's like her um, falling apart and also saying that I love you, and that's just the way that she's gonna say it. And I feel like that between like Louis and Lestat, his hate is like I love you, but it's like very toxic because in the book, I think it just comes from a place of so much pain and the unaliving ideation and everyone else dying around him that he has no I love you to give except like his rage and his hatred. And I feel like that's ultimately what Armand sees in him. And so then the breakup happens, and I think this is Armand saying this, and he goes on like, you can only have the desperate confusion and longing and the chasing of phantom goodness in its human form. And then he goes on to go, and I accepted that. And so that passion, that love you saw in me was extinguished, and you see now simply a mirror of yourself. And so basically, that these two people are just like, they're both empty in their circumstance. And so Armand says, is there anything else you want from, do you require anything else from me? And he's like, no. And so that's the breakup. Armand just leaves and doesn't say much else. And then it's so wild. Like the way that also Louis doesn't take responsibility. Because once he kind of like realizes, comes to the conclusion that Armand has left him, he goes, and I went downtown one night and took the coffin out and broke it into pieces and left it in the narrow aisle of the cemetery in that tall grass. So that's what he does with Armand's coffin. But I thought that was like an interesting specific way that he got rid of his coffin, because I feel like that was actually used between the breakup early on with Lestat and Louis in the television show. And so then we hit the end, and like the boy says, "Make me a vampire," and then like Louis gets upset because he feels like you do not understand like the whole point of the story, right? And the boy feels the opposite. The boy feels like it's Louis that doesn't understand um, his own story. But for Louis, I think he's saying, I was given something that's considered a gift, but that means I'm just going to live forever, which means all I'm going to do is see everyone die around me. I can't have any human connections because if I do, it leads to dire circumstances. It doesn't go well. But also, if I don't stay in contact with humanity in some way, I will be lost. I will be forever like encapsulated in the time of my era, and I won't know how to endure. I will not know how to survive into the next era as humanity keeps going and ever evolving. I will be encapsulated um in the time of my own era. And so I felt like that's what Louis was trying to say, like how devastating and how like tragic to be a vampire is, but that's not what the boy gets in his story. And so we get like a glimpse that like the boy wants to go seek out Lestat because he heard the whole story and he's like, this ain't it. I need to be what you are. And so, yeah, I hope you like this very long. I cannot believe how long this video is going to be, but I hope you like my long rambling. I just decided to go through the whole darn thing. And you know what? I think I'm going to do that with every single one. I'm still going to put out my videos of like per character, but you know what? I still got to read the books. I still got to go through them. Um, this book, it still hits after all this year. It still hits. I'm so glad that I made notes on the inside because the next time when I do come around to read this again, I'm also just going to reflect on like my previous notes and see what I noticed that was different. If you somehow stayed around for this long, um, thank you. I think that just shows your passionate love for Interview the Vampire as much as I have so much love for the book and the show. Um, the adaptation is incredible, so spot on. The changes are not changes for the sake of changes, but to serve Anne Rice's story. Um, there are some things. Oh, okay. There were some things I want to talk about before we end this. Um, I'm gonna put a different banner on, and this is just like a spoiler thing. Should I? I'm not there yet. I think I could talk about this because it was on the show. Okay, so on the show, I'll talk about one more thing and then I have to put the spoiler thing up. So on the show, on season 2, episode 5, what the show did was Louis has a attempts to unalive himself. Um, I read there's so many books. Let me see. Did I? There's a book. It's called Merrick. It's like so many books deep into the show. I don't even know. Seventh, eighth, ninth book. I don't know. Well, we'll say it's like around the seventh book. In the Vampire Chronicles. I don't like what they did with the character Merrick. Um, and I don't really like how the way Anne Rice handled Louis. But what I will say about that story overall is Merrick is a character that's like she's she's a Mayfair witch, a very powerful witch, and Louis goes to her because he's kind of like hearing whispers that someone sings Claudia's ghost, and he wants to conjure her up no matter how dangerous the thing is because he just walks around with so much grief for Claudia that I think this is like him maybe wanting to find closure. Um, and so this Mayfair witch, Merrick, does what Louis wants, but makes it very clear that this is dangerous. And just because Claudia appears does not necessarily mean that it's Claudia. Merrick has no control over who comes from the other side of the spirit realm. This person could just be feasting on Louis's insecurities and feelings and present a Claudia shape. And so what happens is Claudia appears, but says all these terrible things, but it's really just like a projection of what Louis feels about himself in the situation and the guilt that he has. And then he tries to unalive himself. And so they took that from that book in Merrick and gave it to the episode 5 of season 2. So what happens on the show did not like surprise me because I already read all those books later. So I knew I thought that was going to happen. I just thought it was going to happen later. I thought it was going to be a part of the season finale. Honestly, I thought it was going to be that's how Lestat was going to come into the picture and maybe somehow rescue Louis from Armand and his despair. But that's not what happened. And what happened on the show is better because then I think about it. Lestat had to work on himself and learn the boundary of staying away from Louis and let Louis have his free will and not impose himself on Louis. And also because of the racial dynamics of the show, if Lestat had showed up and done what I thought might happen, that would also be problematic. That would be kind of like that would be Lestat creating the same problem that he did in the first place, which was like very like undertones of like white saviorism. And so ultimately in this story on the show, Louis had to save himself, right? He had to come to relations realizations for himself, and he had to get out himself out of a situation that he created for himself ultimately. Um, so yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about that. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave it there. This will be the end. I am gonna talk about some spoiler things, um, a couple of like theories, but I've talked about it before, but just in case, I'm gonna go ahead and put the spoiler chat up. Um, okay, so in the book, oh, I'm gonna forget. Lestat's dad is with them, and so Lestat's dad treated him terribly. I don't know if they're gonna go back. I know they're gonna talk about Gabrielle. We're gonna see Lestat's family, but I wonder if they're gonna change it to like where Lestat's dad was with them in the home. I doubt it. I just wonder because that's what happened. And I wrote another note and I didn't want to forget it. Shoot. The other thing was there's a theory, not mine. It's a radical theory that people keep. I don't know where it started, but the fans are saying that Daniel in the show, he talks about his wife Alice, and there's this moment in the show where he says when he starts to open up to Louis and says something like, "My wife had this like blonde in her eyebrow, and he always liked it, but she would dye it." Um, he just loved his wife for who she was. There's a theory that Armand is Alice, and this is part of like the false memories. And what stuck out for me in reading Interview with the Vampire was that Louis indicates that the coven wears black and they also dye their hair. So, what would be interesting is that what if Armand on the show has black hair, but what if their approach, Alice, if Armand is Alice, what if mentioning that like the blonde, there was like a little bit of blonde or something, or like it's a little bit of a lighter streak in the eyebrow is an indication that Armand to this day, because he's so wrapped up in ritual and um, you know, occult behavior that he just can't shake. What if Armand dyes his hair and his eyebrows, and that he might be like he might have like light auburn hair like the books, and so that was that was when that was coming off on the eyebrow, it may have been just an indication that the dye was wearing off, and so that would kind of indicate that Armand is Alice as well. I think it's a wild theory, but season two kind of like I can't believe it. I thought that was so ridiculous. I was like, that can't be true. But season two had me kind of feeling like maybe that is true. And then when I read that about the dyeing of the hair, that really took me. I wrote something else down. Also, in the show, okay, so in the books, Armand is a part of like the theater, but they just made it really clear in the show that like Armand is a director, and they kind of use that to make it clear like that Armand is calculated and always manipulating the situation. But I also think that in the first season, fake Rashid, which was Armand, was also an indication that Armand can't help but he's like trying to stay away, but he wants to control the situation. So and also Armand is someone that's also very much like a voyeur, and we see that in Queen of the Damned with his relationship with Daniel. And so I feel like if you look at the framing sometimes of Armand on the show, he's always watching in the first season as fake Rashid. And there's even this moment where like Louis is outside on the balcony, and Daniel is sitting on the couch, and in the foreground there's fake Rashid watching this whole thing, and that kind of reminded me of like his need for control to direct what's going on. And I wonder if like Armand has he always has like plan after plan after plan going on. Armand may be holding on to this relationship that is over from the beginning, but he always has like another plan and another plan and another plan. So I wonder in some way, as much as Armand wants to hold on to Louis and is bothered like that, he's like a spider that's turned into himself. Even on the show in this relationship, he uh, Louis is not emotionally moved by Armand. Um, I wonder if what's going on in the show is also an indication that Daniel is also his backup plan. That he had a prior relationship with Daniel, and so I also feel like he thinks like he's holding on to the relationship, but if it doesn't work out, fine, they've broken up, but at least he has Daniel now. And I think that's probably why he also changed him. Because on the show, one, Armand indicated that when Lestat basically blew up the way that he runs his coven, he let it happen. He wanted it happen. And two, we see that happen again in Paris with the theater coven with Louis and Claudia. He always has another plan. So Louis was supposed to be unalive, but he didn't. So what happened? He let him take out his coven. So that was like the second time he manipulated a situation. And so the third time I think is how staged this relationship is. And I think in some ways Armand may have let this happen. Because by the end, when Louis gets upset on the show and throws Armand against the wall, it's like real quick. He just pushes him and is like, "Hey, respect my boundary." But then that's like Armand leaves it alone, and I think it's an indication because he was already with his next plan to make Daniel a vamp. That's what I'm thinking. I'm so annoyed. I made another note, and now I don't remember what it was. But yeah, I think that's covering everything in terms of spoiler talk. Yeah, that's everything. This is so long. I knew this was going to be incredibly long, not this long. So, with that said, thank you for being here. For if you're, I mean, this would be wild. Thank you for being here. Trying to get this closed out. I have so much stuff everywhere. It's been it's the next day. This is when I shot this at night. Um, Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for going on this wild, wild rambling ride. If you're still with me, um, if you like my channel, subscribe, like, and let me know all your thoughts in the comments about Interview the Vampire, about the book, about the show. Was there anything you missed that you want to give praise to in terms of the adaptation? Because I am not like a book purist. I love what the show has done. I feel like it really embodies like the emotional current of Anne Rice's writing and the point of her work, which is to represent outsiders and have these like deep conversations uh, about God. And that's something that she was really grappling with her entire life. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I'll start talking all over again. But thank you so much to all my bookish buddies. Thank you for your support. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the chat.